Well, now that we have a quiz done, and I know everybody, when they're done with the quiz, they feel a little bit of remorse. Everybody would like to be taking quizzes all the time in this course, and that's the story. I'm sticking to it. We've got Excel activity today. So I wanted to start by talking about something that I discovered several years ago, and I used to have a link in the table here. I just been trying to update the link. It was available last year. It's not available now. I guess Yahoo Finance eventually says something is outdated and they're going to get rid of it. But I still think it's an interesting discussion to have. So, and it's particularly relevant to me, not as relevant to you, though it does have a long-term impact on you. The story behind this article is this article was reading that people are basically telling people don't retire early, retire later, because then you get the most out of your benefits. And they provided the table in this table in this particular article. They were saying if you were going to be receiving $1,000 per month if you retire early, which full retirement age is 67, early retirement you'd only get 70% of that per year. And if you wait till 70 years old, you actually get a premium on that, $1,240 as opposed to $1,000. This is Social Security payments per month. Now, you may be saying, how's this relevant to me? And the answer is it's not going to be relevant to you for probably about 40 years or so, but it will be relevant eventually, assuming that society as we know it has not collapsed and the AI machines have taken over. Depending on who you talk to, it's a possibility. But this is something, whenever I read articles, I tend to approach them with an air of professional skepticism. I'm not sure where I get that from. But I tend to be skeptical. And this is one of those skepticism points that I had. It's like, all right, this is problematic because they're trying to make the argument that you should wait to retire until you're 70 because you make more money in doing so. And the truth is, on a monthly basis, yes, you do make more money. But are we, as accountants, as human beings, are we concerned about whether we make more money over in a single month, or are we more concerned about whether we make more money in the long term? I made the argument, said there's probably an argument to be saying that you want to retire earlier because you have a longer period of time to take payments. Because one thing they didn't mention there, they were really good around dancing around it, is there's only a limited window in which you can take payments for Social Security. Okay. Now, by the time that you all retire, it may be that Social Security pays you out for your lifetime and you've achieved immortality, which if that's the case, I mean, kudos to you all. Okay. You really have made the world a better place. I'm thinking about kind of the current generation, and then we're all looking and we're saying, all right, what is our about life expectancy? And the article was really, really good about dancing around it. It didn't use the term life expectancy. It said, when you reach 65, how much longer do you think you have beyond that? And they were saying people who reach the age of 65 generally will live another 25 years, which was good for me because if I make it to 65, then I've got another 20, 25 years to go to, so I can plan around that. But anyway, I wanted to do some breakdown of this. So I basically what I did is I used this table right here to kind of set up an analysis. And I did some basic assumptions. I said return on investment 5%. So 5% return on my assets for every year. And that's basically that may not be applicable to Social Security, but that's how I would calculate return on other assets. I assumed a life expectancy of 90, which again, that's an adjustable assumption, but that's what the article was arguing. It's like the people who make it to 65, they usually live another 25 years. And then primary insurance amount. This is basically the calculation for Social Security payments on a monthly basis. And if you were curious about how Social Security is currently calculated, there's a comment here. Basically says 2025, it's 90% of the first $1,226 you earn a month, 32% of earnings of 1174, and then over 1226. I forgot to make that adjustment, but under 73.91, and then 50% of 91. So I adjusted this. I'm going to make that correction because it's going to drive me crazy otherwise. All right, here we go. So 1226. This should be 1226. Your tuition dollars at work, me making edits to an Excel spreadsheet. Yeah. All right. So yeah. And so I actually was dealing with this the other day for obvious reasons. I'm doing retirement planning because even though I act young, I am old. And I was trying to figure out what my primary insurance amount was, and unadjusted for time value, it's around $3,000, and that's a kind of a good rule of thumb. I think everybody can note. Now, Interestingly, the way the PIA calculation works, it's on a monthly basis and it's over the lifetime of your earnings, but it takes the top 35 earning years. And so if you say, well, I didn't earn very much when I was young, Dr. Barnes, but I earn much more old, they will actually take that as a scale. It behooves you to do well when you're young, which is kind of the drawback I had because I was kind of a slacker when I was your age. Not kind of, I was a slacker when I was your age. Like some of you may be sitting in this room, I could beat you, Dr. Barnes. No, you could not have beaten me in my slacker phase. Okay. Yeah. By virtue of the fact that you're sitting in the classroom right now, you can't beat me. Okay. So yeah, but they do scale it based on inflation as well. So I was looking back, and so for 2023, the scale for inflation back to 1990 was over 3 times the amount. So whatever I had earned back in 1990 when I first went to college would actually have a multiplier of 3 times. I was only 18 at the time, but it's still kind of interesting. It's interesting to know that inflation has taken that big of a toll in that short time period. So 1990, 35 years ago. Shut up. All right. Yeah. So yeah. What are we looking at here? What are we coming up with? So basically, I came to the conclusion based on these assumptions, and I basically did a $1,000 primary insurance amount because it's a nice round number. Again, I think everybody in this room will have a primary insurance amount much greater than that. But if I assume these values at 62, your lifetime value of your earnings is about $126,000, which is not substantially different than being at 70. Okay. So I'd say the article is a bit misleading. In fact, it's actually taking it at 70 is less valuable than taking it at 62. Actually, the sweet spot is right at 66, it's 128,000. Now, this is implicit on based on assumptions. What happens if I change some of the assumptions? Like, what if I change the ROI to 4%? You may argue that's a more reasonable percentage, okay, because your real earnings after inflation are closer to 4% than 5%. That's a fair point. If that's the case, then it looks like that the actual best time is to retire to 100, or is it 69, where you actually maximize your earnings. Or if we go and we say, what if we think it's going to be a shorter window for life expectancy? What if I say I think I'm only going to live till I'm 85? Then retiring earlier makes more sense. So yeah, interesting stuff. And this is kind of again, I don't think this is going to be relevant to you for a very long period of time, but it does underlie some important points that we have to make with Excel. Is that Excel is probably our most versatile financial planning tool that we have available to us. Now, hopefully everybody in this room is good at financial planning, and you've spent the past 4.5 years preparing for the ability to do that. But one of the best things you can use are not the apps online or not going to a website and get research, but actually using your own knowledge and things that you've learned in activities to be able to utilize this to make decisions. And trust me when I say that if you do this properly, you should be making these decisions very, very soon, if not already making the decisions. Some of these decisions you should be making right now. Some of these you should be making here within the next year, and we should be taking them very seriously. So we're going to talk a little bit about how to apply those decisions today. Now, again, some of this you may already be doing. Some of this may seem new to you. I fully encourage you to everything that we're going to talk about today, that you start learning to actively engage with this on a constant basis. And these are things that I do very consistently. I won't say on a daily basis, though I'm an accountant, so I use Excel on a daily basis. But I will say that if you don't do them on a daily basis, at least do them at least on a monthly basis. Consider this. So the first thing we're going to talk about is we're going to talk about amortizations. Everybody remember amortization back from 303? Okay. Remember you had to take out your pen and you had to write down 5 years of amortization. You had to do that for an exam, and you're just kind of like, this is the biggest misery of in the world. And I will say, amortization by hand sucks. Okay, amortization by hand sucks. But we're not doing things by hand. I'm not gonna make you take out a pencil. That would really kind of defeat the purpose of an advanced AIS course, don't you think? What I am going to talk about is I'm going to talk about why we do amortization using spreadsheets. Because amortization using spreadsheets is very, very convenient, but also very, very powerful. So if you did kind of miss the purpose of amortizations back in 303 when you were doing them, the whole goal was to be able to track financing activity over a particular period of time. And you may think, well, we already have formulas that do this for us in Excel, and you're absolutely right. But the whole goal here is not to say what is the activity at a point in time, or at the end of the investment or the beginning of the investment. It's to say when I look over the entire period, I can pinpoint where my status is at a given point in time. So how is this relevant? Is anybody planning on buying a house in the future, or thinking of, not even planning, but thinking about buying a house? How long do our most mortgages in the United States? 30 years, okay? Might you come up to the question at some point during that 30-year period, I wonder what my mortgage balance is? Do you think that might come up? That usually comes up for me on a monthly basis. Like, I wonder what my mortgage balance is. I bought a house back in 2017. I refinanced back in 2020, and I am curious as to what my balance is pretty consistently because I'm getting close to retirement. I want to have it paid off. So what one thing that you say is, well, I can just go to the bank website and I can look at my statistics or whoever holds a mortgage and do that. But wouldn't it be better if you could just kind of do this analysis on your own? That is the power of these particular tools. So let's go ahead and let's deal with a very basic amortization. So anybody thinking about maybe buying a car once they leave, once they graduate from treatment, once you actually get that sweet bonus from your employer, and you actually have a steady paycheck coming in, that's more than what we pay you as GTRAs or what we pay you for scholarship or whatever, or student loans or whatever it may be. Yeah. So let's go ahead and do some basic assumptions. So let's say you've got a monthly payment. You decided, I'm going to buy a car and I can afford a monthly payment of $500. Everybody pretty comfortable with that? I think $500 is pretty rate. I used to tease my dad because whenever we would go someplace and he'd look at the price of something and says, I can't believe it costs that much. I'm turning into my dad now, okay? $500 monthly payments like 30 years ago would have just been disastrous to me. There's no way I could have afforded that. Now I'm thinking students coming out of college, they're going to assume that $500 is a pretty reasonable monthly payment. But yeah, $500. Interest rates, hopefully by the time that you're out, the 5% interest rate will be pretty convenient for your loan on your car. But we're gonna pay that, and we'll say loan term in 60 months. Okay. So I've already calculated the present value. What is the function to use to calculate this, by the way? I'm really surprised. I thought I was going to hear a cacophony of present value, Dr. Barnes. It's the PV formula. Has anybody used the PV formula before? All right, let's use the PV formula if you've not used it before. So, okay, you'll notice that I've already got my inputs up here. And one thing that I think is a good habit to get into is instead of hard keying inputs, leave them as variables. So you'll know I put my inputs up here. The reason why is if I want to change my inputs and want to adapt this formula, I can do this automatically instead of having to retype the formula. So equals PV, and then that's going to be 5%. I divide by 12 because we're trying to do this on a monthly basis. And then F4 is the number of periods, which are going to be 60, so 5-year loan. And then my monthly payments, the payment amounts, I always put the negative sign before so I get a positive value, and I put that 500 in. So you can actually go in and you can click on it, and it will tell you what the formula looks like for a present value. This is rate, number of periods, payment, all those in there. So that's how we get the present value formula. Which again, what does this tell us? Tells us if we want to pay no more than $500. Now, again, this is ignoring taxes and title and all the other costs. Don't ignore insurance, especially if you're going to be under 25 when you buy your first car. Insurance can be a killer, okay? But if we wanted to pay, do a maximum of $500 per monthly payment, then we can buy a car that's roughly $26,500, which is a pretty nice car, okay? It's about what my new car costs, actually. I just bought a car fairly recently back in April, and it was roughly that amount. Obviously, this is going to be reduced by anything you can pay down on it, and you can actually reduce that term. But if we're assuming no down payments, that was going to be the value of the car. All right, so that is sufficient if we want to know the beginning and end results. But what if we want to know what the results are during the middle? Let's go ahead and create an amortization table to prove this effectively. All right, so we're going to start out here. And you notice I've set up the amortization table already to save a little bit of time. And I like to do like a 5-column amortization table. I like to know what my period is, the payment amount, the accrued of interest, the principal reduction, and the loan amount. So let's talk through each of these, okay? So period is pretty obvious, all right? After the first month, I'm going to pay down an amount. By the way, this is assuming an annuity, an ordinary annuity, which is going to be paid at the end of the period as opposed to annuity due. Can you adjust for this? Yeah, it's pretty easy to do, but it's simplified to do ordinary annuity. All right, so payment amount, we already know that's going to be equal to the monthly payment. Let's go ahead and set our absolute cell reference here so that we don't change that. Interest accrued, okay, since it was an ordinary annuity, we're going to have a month of interest accrued on this loan amount. So we're going to multiply this times the interest rate And we're going to actually set that as a absolute cell reference. And then again, remember, we have to divide by 12 because we're doing this on a monthly basis. Then principal reduction. So what is this column for? Well, keep in mind, whenever you're making a payment on a loan, that the amount of the payment minus the interest that's paid on the loan is actually what will reduce your principal. So you actually pay the interest first, and then then everything else goes towards reducing the principal. By the way, if you get in a position where your payment is not covering your interest, you are in a losing position. That's the problem with a lot of the student loans that are being in the news nowadays, is a lot of people are making minimum payments. It's not even covering the interest amount. So what happens to that interest? That gets added onto the principal, which is great if you're an investment and you're trying to make money. It's terrible if you're in debt and it gets added onto debt. Okay. So principal reduction is very simple. It's just this amount minus this amount. And then our loan amount is going to be reduced by that principal reduction. So at the end of period one, $26,106. All right. Now we've created one line of our amortization table. And if we've done this properly, we can create the entire amortization table based on this. So I'm just going to do for my period equals this plus 1 so that I have a drop down pretty easily. Then I'm going to copy this down here. And then I'm going to copy this down for 60 periods. See if I can get this right. So what did I start on? 60. It's going to be around 68. So hard to do because I don't have much room. All right. Look at that. We got to $0, which is our eventual goal here. Which, if we did it correctly, that's where we were always going to go. Now, what if this was not $0 at the end of 60 months? I did the amortization table wrong. That's basically what the answer is. Now, why is this important? Well, what if you come into a little bit of money about 2 years into your loan and you think, I can pay off my car? It'd be good to know that after 2 years, you still have $16,000 due on the car, $16,683 on the car. Now, the good news is the dealership would tell you this, but it's also good for planning if you don't want to go through that rigmarole of having to rely on other people for information. All right, so I know what you're saying. You're a little bit upset right now. Okay, you're like saying, Dr. Barnes, you've not given me any information that I can really use because this is information that I can utilize for. I can actually utilize the same information, but I can just get this information off of the website. I can contact my loan holder. So everybody is really, really upset with me right now. I can tell you're not looking at me. That's why you're really upset with me. So that's fair. That's fair. So let me give you some information that you can use. Does amortization just work for loans? Does it only work for loans, or can we actually use it for other purposes as well? Like, for example, if we wanted to plan savings, could we use amortization for that as well? Everybody see where I'm going with this? Yeah, going with the amortization. All right, so let's go ahead and do a quick amortization. I'm not going to do the full amortization because that's part of your assignment for today. But what if we wanted to use this same amortization format, but instead I wanted to use this. Oops. To plan out long-term savings. All right, so let's go ahead and saying I'm going to still do $500. I'm going to save $500 a month. Okay. Now, let's go ahead and change our columns here because this is going to be very, very relevant here. So we still have a payment amount. That's the amount that we're paying every month. We're still accruing interest. All right. Are we reducing principal whenever we have an investment that we're saving money for in the long term? Like say for example, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to pay my money into a retirement account. What's going to happen to that investment over time? Is it going to get smaller or larger? Well, if it's getting smaller, you're doing this wrong. Okay, you're doing this wrong. You're investing very, very badly. Okay, so hopefully it gets larger. Hopefully, because we have this thing called compound interest, it gets much larger, and that's the goal we do. So interest. So we should have a principal increase. Oops. And then we'll just say investment amount. Now, at the beginning of the investment, how much is your investment worth? 0. We haven't put anything in there. Now let's go ahead and fix the formulas. Interest accrued first period. This is not going to change. Actually, it will change because we will need to make sure that we put in a percentage since we're referring to another formula. So let's just go ahead and say, oops. F3, okay. And we're just going to change that to 5%. We're going to assume that we're earning 5% on our investments. Principal increase. Are we still subtracting C4 from D4? No. Remember, we're adding interest on because we're the ones that are holding the investment. And then the investment amount should increase based on what we input. Oops. I should probably put a plus sign in there. All right. So let's just go ahead and do a quick class poll. Okay. Let's assume that I'm going to invest 5%, or I'm going to invest $500 a month. Or I'm going to put in $500 a month into an investment account. And I'm going to do this at 5% interest for 30 years, 360 periods. Let's take a guess. What do we think our investment will eventually be worth? It's $500 a month at 5% for 360 or for 30 years. How many people think $1 million? Not quite that much. What about $500,000? Still a little bit below that, but pretty close. Anybody want to take a wild guess? Has anybody got the amount right off the top of their head? All right. I'm going to draw this down for 360 periods. Apologies for the scrolling. Oops. And that's what we have. $416,120 after $29 after 360 periods. Now, just out of curiosity, is anybody planning on working 30 years and retiring? I mean, if you are, kudos to you. Okay. What is probably the more likelihood? What is probably the range? 40 years. So we can actually draw this down a little bit further. Let's go ahead and down to 480 months. So that's pretty good. 376,000. Yes. Sure. The interest formula is just your investment amount times whatever percentage you're earning, which I did 5% for this one, divided by 12 because we're doing it on a monthly basis. So whatever your previous investment amount was, I guess I can show you. So previous investment amount times 5% divided by 12. It means that probably your number is off on your principal or that your payment is increasing. So did you do a principal increase? Did you add those two numbers together and did you change the investment amount so that this is adding to the investment instead of subtracting from it? Okay. Yeah. All right. We'll take a look at it here in just a second, but I want to make sure we move on to the last part. So what does this tell us? So we invest early, we make a lot of money because it almost doubles in that 10-year period. The investment almost doubles in that 10-year period because of that extra 10 years that we have. So if you want to work for 50 years, which again, longevity, again, that's probably going to close to double over that time period as well. So invest early, invest often. That's going to be something that I encourage you to do. So don't do as I say, not as I do, because I was really bad about investing, mostly because I didn't graduate from college till I was in my 30s. But yeah, I want to make sure we take advantage of that. That was going to be the key to making sure we have a long livelihood success and we can retire comfortably. All right, one other thing we're going to be doing today. This is something that I personally hold very dear. This is the idea of budgeting. So a little bit of background on the reason that I think budgeting is important. When I was working at KPMG, I started a job where I was earning a very comfortable living, even living in Dallas, which is, higher cost of living. I was fairly comfortable, and I got steady raises over a 5-year period. Now, one thing that they don't tell you about going into academics is that you're going to have to take a 4 to 5 year break from actually earning a lot of money. So I actually got a really nice scholarship when I decided to pursue my PhD. When I say nice scholarship, it was 50% of my salary. So imagine spending a certain amount of money every single year, and then you're stuck with 50% of that for the next 5 years. That was basically the scenario that I ran into, is that I had basically my disposable income was chopped in half. Or I shouldn't say disposable, my overall income was chopped in half. The problem is that I was not doing budgeting at the time, and so I just assumed I'm just going to continue spending exactly the same way I was spending when I was living in Dallas. That did not work very, very long. I had some money saved up, and I saw my savings depleting really quickly, and I was like, okay, I've got to track this. I've got to make sure I follow it. So that's where I got into budgeting, and so this has been a now going on 15-year habit that I'm very happy with. Now, if you already use budgeting tools, if you already use Excel for budgeting, kudos to you. If you don't, I encourage you to start doing it very, very soon. In fact, you're going to be forced to, because part of your assignment is you're going to have to create a budget for the next year. You're going to have to create a budget for the next year. So what are the elements of a budget that I think are really important? Well, you can kind of see I've got a line item budget here that's 3 columns. And even if you want to do something different, that's fine. If you've got a budget that's already set up, there are certain things that you do have to include, and there's a reason why, and I'll explain here in just a second. So I actually have all of my inputs and my outputs. So you can see here that I got my paycheck for Tumen State, which whopping $2,000 a month. Okay. They actually don't actually pay me that. I'm not going to tell you what they pay me, but it's not $2,000 a month. It's slightly less than that. So, yeah. And then I've got items that I've included here. Now, I do have a lot of items that are consistent payments that I have to make every single year, or every single month, I should say. And I track these every single month. I have a line item for discretionary spending that's called my allowance for personal spending. This does not mean that it's something that's not mandatory. I include groceries in this, and I can include gasoline, but it's anything that I have discretion over the amount on which I want to spend. So for example, if I want to go to Seabreeze and buy a cheeseburger and spend a lot of money, if I'm a little bit short on cash for that particular month, I may say I'm going to have to forego Seabreeze and buy a cheeseburger at McDonald's. God forbid that would ever be the case, okay? God forbid, all right? But that would be an example of a discretionary spending decision that I might make. Okay, because cheeseburger is mandatory spending. Let's just put it that way. All right. So this is going to be my tracking of my items for a period. And I try to do this roughly in order of when these transactions occur. Like my house payment occurs at the beginning of the month, as does my IRA withdrawal. And so I track those. Near the end of the month, that's when Netflix and Amazon Prime hit, and they hit my account. So I try to track these sequentially. So that's pretty straightforward. We can actually do a line item tracking of budget, and that's not going to be difficult. But this really defeats the purpose if we don't know what our relative cash position is for our cash purposes. If we don't know if that's an accurate amount, so you actually used to have something like this that you did back in financial accounting. So remember back in 302 with Dr. Eisen, and you got your bank account statement. What did you do with that bank statement as a company? You reconciled it. Remember reconciled it, the bank reconciliation? We can do the same thing for our own personal spending. So here's how I format my reconciliation. You kind of see, here's my update date for today, okay? And I compare my balance per book to my balance per bank. And my balance per book is just what it says. It's whatever the last line item is, okay? Whatever the last line item is that I've highlighted. I also track my remaining spending, which again, it's just the amount of this $500 that I have left to spend because I don't spend it all at once. So I actually have an app on my phone. It's not particularly difficult. It's the Notepad app that I track how much remaining discretionary spending I have, and I include that number on here. Also, you'll notice I have other here. These are items that I've paid but have not cleared. So this yellow highlight basically means that I have paid this bill, but has not cleared the bank account yet. So it's still sitting in limbo. I could adjust that either bank side or book side. I choose to do it book side. So that's how I do the reconciliation. And then that is what my balance per books, my net balance per books is. So again, this is the balance per books, net of anything I have left in spending, plus anything that hasn't cleared yet. So it's not something that I say is paid, but has not actually cleared the bank yet. Then I clear my balance per bank, okay? My balance per bank is just go to my website. My website is US Bank, okay? Your bank may be something else, but you can see what your balance is at a given point in time. I actually reduced that for all of my credit cards. Now I only put one credit card up here, but I actually have 3 rotating credit cards that I use for different purposes. All right, 3 rotating credit cards. And what is the rule for credit cards? What do we know about credit cards? We carry a balance on them for really, really high balances on them for long periods of time, right? I'm actually just seeing how many people are paying attention to me because if I were nodding your head, you're just basically saying, yeah, we pay off our balances every single month. Okay. That's the way to take advantage of credit cards is that you don't ever have a balance in which they can charge you fees. Okay. Now, did I learn that lesson the hard way? I learned it the hard way and I learned it multiple times the hard way. So don't repeat my mistakes, especially not for credit cards, because those are predatory interest rates. So pay off those balances every single month. So I assume that anything I have in bank is going to be reduced by my credit card balance because that gets paid off no matter what. Okay. If I'm lying in the hospital and I need a kidney replacement, I'm still going to pay off my credit cards. That's just given. Okay. That's going to be my priority. It's like, okay, we're not going to the operating table just yet. I've got to pay my credit card down. It wouldn't be a big deal. I've got the automatic pay now. So anyway, my bank balance is reduced by my credit card balance, and this is a comparison. Now, here's something you will notice, and this is a personal preference to you. Everything that I've got on my transactions here are rounded to the nearest $5. And if my father, my rest of his soul, were still alive, he would be yelling at me right now. Okay. As it is, I think every time I teach this lesson, he rolls over a little bit in his grave. Okay. But simply because he was one of those people that had to reconcile everything to the penny. And if you're one of those people, go right ahead and do that. Okay. I'm an auditor. I care about materiality if something is materially different. So whenever I'm doing this reconciliation, usually I'm looking to see if these two numbers are about $50 within each other. I always make sure that my bank balance is much higher or is higher than my book balance. That's one thing that it's a given. I have to make sure. But I'm not concerned if these two numbers are the same. I'm concerned if they're close. Because if they're close, in case. Now, interesting story. I was actually telling about this activity to one of my students. This is actually everybody gone or people are not familiar with the awards dinner that occurs at the end of the year where they hand out awards to everybody. We were at the awards dinner and I was sitting with a student and his family, and his mother was a very, very nice human being. She seemed very, very heavy on control. Okay. And so I was explaining that basically whenever I reconcile my budget, I just round it to the nearest $5, and her eyes bulged out of her head. All right. I thought she was going to have an aneurysm right there. It was really, really concerning. And I'm concerned that I thought she was ready to drop her son out of the class just right there, then and there, just because I said I don't round or don't resolve to the nearest penny, to the exact penny. So yeah, if you want to do that, that's certainly your concern. I'm not considering about that. All I care about is that you do the bank reconciliation. It's close. Okay. Now, quick note, you are going to be doing a bank reconciliation for the entire year. I would encourage you to do a real reconciliation, a budget and reconciliation, I should say, a budget and reconciliation. I would encourage you to do one that you can find useful, but there are a couple of caveats. Okay. First of all, you may not want me to know what your true financial position is, and that's fair. I'm not going to require you share your personal financial details with me. You can make up numbers as long as they're reasonable numbers. Please don't say that you've got $1 million in personal luxury yacht expenses unless you actually have $1 million in personal luxury yacht expenses. And if that's the case, I'd be like, why are you here instead of on your personal luxury yacht? Okay. Now, the second thing to note is that this reconciliation is for a point in time. You'll notice I have a date up here. You cannot do a reconciliation for every single period because we have not reached every single period. The only reconciliation you can do is for a particular point in time, so you only have to do a single reconciliation for the assignment. But you are going to have to create a budget for the entire year. Now, it sounds like a lot, but basically once you map out the expenses for 1 month, you're largely going to be doing copy and paste for the next 8 months. You can actually figure out some things. I would encourage you to include some additional items. For example, you've got tuition that's going to be coming up in spring, so you might want to account for that. You may have some other expenses like you're traveling home for Thanksgiving or for Christmas or stuff like that. Basically, try to be as detailed as you can in the budget without just going completely and totally mad. So your assignment for today is you're going to create 2 amortizations. One amortization is going to be buying a house, okay? Your house payment protocol is based on an annual salary of $48,000. I assume that most everybody in this room is going to be earning more than $48,000 in their first job, but $48,000 was really nice because it rounds very neatly by 12, okay, divides very neatly by 12. Then you're going to have an investment assignment where you're going to be planning on trying to earn $1 million from retirement. I'm not saying $1 million is sufficient. I'm saying that was the number that I just came up with. More likely, if you're going to do investment planning for your own personal circumstance, I would try to save as much as you can and get your employer to match on that too. That's going to be the case. But ignoring all that, you're going to be doing some investment consideration for trying to make $1 million in 40 years. Then the next part of the assignment, the last two parts are going to be the budget and the reconciliation. That is basically our activity. All right. Are there any questions? Anything that you want me to go over that we've discussed that you need a little clarification on? All right, so we have 5 minutes left. I'll take a look at any issues that you have, but we can call it good from here. I'll see you all on Monday.